Well, one win for free speech took place in New Zealand this week. The New Zealand government has withdrawn highly contentious hate speech laws and promised to refocus on bread and butter economic issues. Well, the New Zealanders should know about that. The Free Speech Union New Zealand was at the forefront of the fight against the proposed laws, which they claim would have made it a criminal offence to criticise religious views. The chief executive of the Free Speech Union, Jonathan Ayling, joins us now. Jonathan, great to see you and congratulations on your role in this. So spell out to our viewers what was at stake here, what part you played.
Well, it's great to be here. Look, for a number of years now, we've been fighting against a progression of these laws, which initially was going to change 6 aspects of the hate speech laws we currently have, massively increasing the criminality and the penalties associated with that, and including a host of individuals where you wouldn't be able to publicly criticize them as a group. And so it was really elevating entire conversations outside of public discourse. And predictably, Rowan, the questions around transgenderism and sexuality were definitely part of that, but we were successful at a certain point in getting them to remove a whole number of provisions. And so the law that has just recently been removed was just about religious groups. Now, off the back of the horrific attack in 2019 in Christchurch, the Royal Commission that was established then suggested that the reforms be considered for our hate speech laws. But what's really telling about that is the fact that the Labour government, who was progressing these, have had hate speech law reforms on their books in their manifesto for at least 2 years prior to that. And this has been an issue they've been wanting to have a reason to pursue for some time. So it's cynical and disturbing at quite a high level. The Muslim population was quite keen to have faith included as a criteria above hate speech. And that's understandable at a certain extent. There's a lot of very horrible things that can be said about the Muslim community or many different religious communities. But we don't believe that they should be elevated above criticism or conversation, and that questions can't be asked. And so we were thrilled to see the Prime Minister remove this. And he removed it because of political liability. But whether he removed it because we convinced him or not, we're glad it's done.
Well, you had a massive campaign. It was, 20,000 submissions. And we've seen with the New Zealand media be very much, they were pretty much Jacinda Ardern's fan club. Has there been much criticism from the mainstream media about this, or was this all led by your group?
The criticism of the law, absolutely not. Criticism of the Prime Minister dropping this law, certainly. There's a whole bunch of academics and journalists and activists who are very concerned, saying that the PM has been backing away from a mandate. Of course, the Labour government here has a majority government. And so when we first picked up this, when the reforms were announced in 2021, the Minister of Justice then said that they would be law by Christmas. And like many other promises that are made by Christmas, thankfully we were able to see that through. That was 2021. Throughout 2022, we continued the fight, and that's when we saw the 6 proposals drop to just 1. But because we had the deck stacked against us, we didn't imagine that we would be able to see this law entirely removed, and thankfully, that's what we see now. The Prime Minister...
Sorry.
Jonathan, I just want to ask you, though, you've got an election coming up in New Zealand. Where does the opposition leader, Luxon, I believe his name is, stand on this? And is this going to be an election issue coming up? And will the media there try and use this, as they often do in Australia, as a way to portray the right as a bunch of retrograde bigots because they believe in free speech?
Well, that's right. It's become a little bit of a political football, and that's unfortunate because free speech is a tool for all of us, actually before anyone, the marginal and the vulnerable. Luxon has actually been relatively quiet on this issue. We don't have him on the record per se, but his justice spokesperson has been out on this, and they've been touting this as a triumph for them as well. I don't think it will be a major political issue this election because the PM has dropped it. But
Jonathan, can I just ask you there, why did this new PM drop it? Is this trying to say that I'm not Jacinda Ardern, this Chris, what's his name? Sorry, Hipkins. Is he trying to distance himself from Jacinda Ardern and say, oh, look at me, I'm not a mad, crazy lefty like she was? Why have they done this?
It's an interesting approach that has been taken here. The hate speech law removal was part of a number of other, what was called policy, it was called a policy bonfire, a number of other policies that were withdrawn. And a lot of them had to do with the more controversial, expensive, perhaps ideological policies that were being pursued. You might say Chris is trying to identify as a different brand here, but of course, he was one of the key lieutenants under Jacinda Ardern, progressing all this agenda. He was leader of the House for the entire time that Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern was Prime Minister. And so he was the one making this all work into legislation. So he is trying to do a brand switch here. Whether it's working, I'm not sure. The question for us is, did we convince him that free speech matters and that hate speech laws don't work? Or did we create a political backlash across the spectrum that threatened him? One way or the other.
I think it's the latter, darling. I think it's the latter. You give them way too much credit if you think, oh, yes, we opened their eyes and they saw the light. Now, what is the status of the polling at the moment? Because we saw Jacinda Ardern jump before she was pushed. The polls were pretty poor for her in the end. Are Labor recovering in the polls, or is it still going to be a Conservative coalition at this stage?
No, it's a dead heat at the moment, really. The two most prominent polls that came out about 10 days ago were pretty much identical and had really neither side been able to form a conclusive majority. So there's some water to go under the bridge. Let's remember we're over 6 months out from the election still, and there's a lot to happen. The Prime Minister has certainly had a bump in the polls, though, coming into the new role, and I think a honeymoon period was expected to an extent. But for us, we're not so much concerned as to whether it's left or right. Interestingly, free speech has been opposed more by the right historically than the left, and so we need to keep that in mind. What we're concerned about is whether we're able to have a discussion around these really big conversations, and unfortunately, neither of the key parties are really as intent on people sitting down and being able to disagree and not prescribing the language that has to be used or the words that they have to keep in mind, but actually let all Kiwis have their say. So we actually need someone to bring that to the table.